Chapter 2. He had two choices. He could make an effort to get spiffed up, a polite gesture considering the occasion, or he could go as is and risk offending his visitor. The simple decision was a veritable quandary to stew over, and considering he had all the time in the world to think on such obviously trivial things, he did. Severus did not entertain guests. The thought alone was humorous, but didn't change the fact that he would, in 3 days' time, meet with a mysterious guest. So then he postulated, was this such a landmark occasion to merit the scrubbing of grime from his neck? He spent the morning carefully and methodically weighing the pros and cons of making up his appearance, before settling on doing absolutely nothing. Not that he didn't know that from the very beginning. No, whoever his visitor was, Severus was under no obligation to make him believe he was anything other than a caged animal. His appearance was of no importance. It never had been. Cleanliness, however, was a paramount. The thought that his students used to believe he was unhygienic brought a cruel smile to his chapped lips. How could he be anything other than a neat freak when the simplest of cross-contaminations in his lab could spell disaster? He was always meticulously clean. Severus was just damn unattractive. Well, there was no point in attempting to change that now. At 2 o'clock, several guards made their presence known by banging on the other doors down his dank corridor. Their comings and goings never surprised him. Every last guard in this prison lumbered through the hallways with the grace and fineness of a mountain troll, and by the racket he imagined a horde of the ugly bastards were standing outside his door now. "Prisoner 11,652, present yourself," a voice barked. The youngest Mulciber boy by the sound of it. My, how the mighty had fallen. Without bothering to hide his irritation at the obvious inconvenience, Severus lifted himself from his cot and stood in the center of his cell, and held his arms out wide to show he wasn't carrying anything. Not like a shiv was any match for a bloody wand. Once satisfied, the door rippled and creaked as the maximum security wards were lifted. He huffed and tapped his foot, showing his displeasure, but truth be told he was quite curious who his first visitor in nearly 5 years could possibly be. In a great anticlimactic moment, Miss Hermione Granger stood in his small kingdom with a similar scowl on her petulant mouth. His cell stank. He was well aware that it did. He did have a keen sense of smell afforded by his great honking nose after all, but there was no reason for her to be so damn rude about it. Her small nose wrinkled up in disgust, and Severus was pleased he hadn't made a single effort to spiff up for her. It was apparent she hadn't bothered to get dressed for him either, the which had always been a plain Jane, but in dirty trainers, casual jeans, and a dumpy pullover, she looked positively underwhelming. Her assessment of the wizard wasn't much kinder. She expected he had lost weight. Not that he was ever a heavy-set man, but the gaunt, sharp angles of his shoulders and face seemed hideously accented by malnourishment. Still, it was Snape, all right. The eyes were the same, of that she was sure. Those black, beady, snake eyes were unmistakable. Rationally, her mind supplied his eyes were a very dark brown. Black eyes were genetically impossible. He simply had a dominant capital BB gene, whereas her unremarkable brown eyes were a more common lowercase bb variety. Pushing those random thoughts away, Hermione studied Snape. She shuddered to think how he might appear beneath his fraying gray woolen robes, especially with his inferi pallor. But most distressing was his obvious lack of care. Seeing Sirius Black not long after his stint in the infamous prison had given her something to expect, and now faced with her ex-professor with a long matted black beard and tangled hair that seemed to be in some stage of dreadlocking itself, Hermione felt a definite stab of pity for the once proud wizard, but only a teensy-weensy stab. Mulciber stuck his head through the door. "We'll be right here, miss. Don't hesitate to call us if the brute tries anything." He was so eager to be helpful, the boy must have found Granger appealing, but then Azkaban was pretty damn remote, and female visitors were practically unheard of. Trelawney would have been appealing to the boy, not to Severus. Even deprived of comfort and company, Granger was nothing to look at. She snorted and fingered her wand in a haphazard way. "Thanks, but I think I've got this." For a lightning second, Severus considered how fast he could disarm the witch, use her wand on the guards, and make a hasty escape. It was possible. If anyone could do it, he certainly could, even if his skills had atrophied a bit. But then it would be risking his neck. After his masters had met their demise, Severus had resolved to never risk his neck again. Or at least, that was his story, and he was sticking to it. "Professor Snape, I could say it's a pleasure to see you, but—" She gestured airily around his domain with a contemptible look. "Well, this isn't a social call." "It's not. Pity. And I had so been looking forward to tea and biscuits." The chit had the temerity to actually chortle at that. "Just what brings you here, then, Granger?" "It's a business proposition." Severus's eyes rose at that. Business? As far as he knew, he had nothing to offer the witch, and certainly nothing to gain from her. He folded his arms across his chest in a display of authority he clearly didn't possess. But it always helped to press one's advantages, and currently the only advantage he had was that people still feared him. "Well, let's hear it." Hermione studied the dirty cell and leveled her wand at a wash rag. Before Severus could register his protest, she impressively transfigured it into a rather plush black leather armchair. Severus muttered, "Show off," just loud enough for her to hear. For added measure, she cast several thorough scourgifies on it. Smart girl. There was no telling what kind of life had been growing on the rag. She sat and primly crossed her legs, earning a contemptuous snort from her former potions professor. He took a seat on his thin cot and leveled his eyes at the interloper. "If you don't mind, I'd like to skip the traditional small talk." Severus nodded his assent, and she continued, "I'd like to propose marriage." For several seconds the silence was nearly audible until a loud click came from his clenched jaws. "Leave, Miss Granger." "Sir, you've had your fun at my expense. Now go." Her brow furrowed. "I assure you, Professor Snape, this is no joke." "The hell it's not. Did Potter put you up to this? Or perhaps those contemptible Weasley twins? Regardless, I find this neither funny nor amusing. Leave, Miss Granger. Go back to your friends at the pub, have a good laugh, and never return." She narrowed her eyes at him and silenced his voice with a quick flick of her wand. Damned woman. She probably only did so to drive home the point that she was armed and he wasn't. Not like he bloody well didn't know that already. "Do I look like I'm joking, sir? That I'd willingly come out to this wretched, filthy place for a giggle? Please, give me a bit more credit than that. I'm quite serious." She waved her wand once more, lifting the silencing spell, and Severus sat back contemplating the witch. Granger was prone to many strange flights of fancy. He mostly chalked it up to her Muggle-born background. No civilized witch or wizard would ever champion the rights of house elves and werewolves as bosom buddies, and while it was still possible she was having him on, it wasn't likely she was going to leave any time soon. "Then explain yourself." With a loud, long-suffering sigh, Granger relaxed back into the armchair. A part of Severus ached to run his fingers up the curve of the armrest and wiggle into the cushion. He only had his mattress as a seat, and the stone wall wasn't quite accommodating on his back. "The Ministry, in its infinite wisdom, has seen fit to pass a marriage law requiring all unwed witches to marry and start popping out babies as soon as possible." For a moment, he could only stare at the girl. Of course, he had no way of knowing what she said were true. Occasionally he got scraps of old newspaper to use as dog paper, but never full articles, and certainly not current events. Severus's brain quickly ran through the ramifications of such a ridiculous law and came to many of the same conclusions that Hermione had. Even without the benefit of knowing more than what she had only just said, he was well able to fill in the missing details. He was well accustomed to the Ministry's modus operandi. No doubt they would put the unwilling witches on a short leash. All in all, it was a bit of brilliance for her to come to him.